Hi, it's Julia here for Creative Healing Art Talk, and today for Earth Day I will be showing you how to draw and shade both a polar bear and an African elephant. So today I'm going to start with showing you how to draw a polar bear. When I draw a bear, any kind of bear, especially a polar bear, I like to start with a nice round head to make sure that it looks nice and soft and fluffy. And to get perspective, I like to add some lines to the center of his face, just so I know exactly where to put his snout and his eyes and his ears relative to the rest of his body. And part of the reason I decided to draw the polar bear here is because they are endangered due to climate change and habitat loss. And it's always just, in my opinion, a really good thing to make other people aware of the issues that a lot of animals face due to things like climate change. And one of the main reasons that there aren't as many polar bears as there were before is primarily because of they are losing their food source, because polar bears primarily eat seals. They've also been known to eat things like walruses and sometimes whales if they wash up on the beach. But without the ice flows to hunt, then they don't have access to the food that they need to live. And polar bears usually don't have eyes that are this big. I'm just drawing them this big so that they look a little bit more friendly, and so they're easier to see and draw. And now I'm starting drawing his body, and I'm making sure that he's nice and soft and round, and he looks really fluffy like a polar bear would. So I started his back, and then I come down to the back leg to make him look round and soft. And then I'm adding some more details to his neck. Like, specifically, I'm adding some fur to make sure that he looks nice and fluffy like polar bears should look, because, they live somewhere really cold, so they need to have a lot of fur to keep them warm. And now I'm moving on to his leg, and I'm making it look like he's walking forward by bending his paw like that. I'm actually drawing this polar bear from observation. I just typed in the word polar bear to Google, and I think this was the first image that showed up, so this is the one I'm using. And when I'm drawing this bear, I like to make sure that all of the angles I make, specifically with his paws and his ears and his face, that they're all very soft and round to make it look like he really is a big fluffy bear. When I like to draw specifically animals, I always make sure that I hold the pencil with a really loose grip, and I hold it from farther back so that way I can get the sketch to be more accurate. And what I'm doing now is just erasing some of the extra sketch lines that I had and making the bear look more clean and less sloppy than it was before. And so once again, I'm moving some more of the excess lines to make the bear look more realistic and to look more fluffy. Now I'm starting to make some of the lines around his face and his ears darker so that they're easier to see, so that I can shade him in a little bit to make him look better. And then here you can see that I messed up. I realized I made his back leg a little bit too long, so I erased part of it to make it look more like he's walking towards us instead of just standing there. And now I'm starting to make his feet look more realistic, like paws. I'm going to add some fluff there to make them look better, to make them look padded. So now I'm trying to make his nose look a little bit darker so that it stands out more, and I'm starting to, this is where I start the process of shading, and I'm starting with his nose so that it's easier to see, to differentiate it from the rest of his body. And now I'm moving on to his eyes, and of course, I made them a lot bigger than they would be on an actual polar bear, but in my opinion, I think that the bigger eyes on this polar bear makes it look a little bit more cute, and that was part of the goal I was going for. And now I am starting to shade the polar bear to make him look like he's more three-dimensional, and to make him look like he is really standing in the sun and that he's walking right towards us. And I also use a tool called a tortillion stump, which is the white little thing that I'm using here. It is specifically meant to help with blending when someone is shading a drawing that they've done. Yeah, so that's what they're used for. And then here I make the lines around his legs and his stomach a little bit darker so that it's easier to tell the difference between, the shading and the actual parts of his body. Alright, and now I'm going to be showing you how to draw and shade an African elephant. And with the elephant, just like the polar bear from before, I start out with a circle for the head to make sure that I get the rest of his proportions right, and just to make sure that his head is the basic shape that it should be. And now I'm starting with his trunk, because what would an elephant be without its trunk? And I'm making it pretty thick so that it's easy to see and easy to draw. And now I'm starting on the tusks of our elephant friend. And actually something really interesting is this is an African elephant, and with African elephants both males and females have tusks, and with Asian elephants only males have tusks. So that's how you can tell, that these are African elephants, is both genders have tusks. A reason that I chose the elephant is specifically because they are at risk due to several different reasons. While the Asian elephant is more at risk than African elephants, their main risk is something called poaching, which is they are unfortunately killed for the ivory that their tusks are made out of. And Asian elephants suffer mainly from habitat loss because they live in the rainforest, and of course that's cut down for a multitude of reasons. But African elephants, while they do face habitat loss, their main threat is poaching for their tusks. Alright, and now I am starting on the ears of our elephant friend. And I'm making sure that they're nice and big because, of course, African elephants do have very large ears when compared to the Asian elephant. And even just compared to any animal, they just have really big ears. And once again, I am making his eyes a little bit bigger than they usually would have been because, first of all, I think that, they're just easier to see when they're bigger, and it's also a little bit more cute when they're larger. And since elephants are the largest land animals that we have, I'm making his body really big and making him look very strong and powerful, and I'm starting at his back and moving forward. Here I'm making the leg tilt a little bit forward so it looks like he is walking right towards us. And then here is his other front leg, and that one is actually what is doing the walking, so he looks like he's coming right towards us. Alright, and now I am moving on to his stomach and then his back leg. And the thing is, he's not nearly as fluffy and furry as the polar bear, so his stomach isn't going to be quite as obvious as the polar bear's. And his legs are a lot longer. And then actually here's another spot that you can tell that I messed up because I erased a large portion of the leg because I realized I made it a lot longer than it should have been to make him look like, again, he's coming towards us. So again, I start at the back of the leg and make it shorter so that he looks like he's walking and he doesn't just look like he's kind of floating there. So yeah, I erased the leg and I made it better. So right now I'm making the lines around his tusks and his trunk and just kind of the rest of his body a little bit darker so that the shading will be easier to differentiate from the actual shadows and his body. And here I'm starting the shading with his trunk because the trunk is just a really easy place to start, especially when you're doing an elephant. And the reason I'm starting with the trunk is the picture that I used, the sun was coming from that angle, so that's why I'm doing it like this. And then again, I'm using my tortillion stump, which is specifically used for shading, and I actually got one from an art teacher friend of mine, so that's why I have this. It's really easy to use, and it makes it look really good, but you can also get the same effect. Sometimes I also just use my fingers to smudge, so you can probably get the same effect using your finger. So this is just a fancier, way to do it. And now I'm moving on to shading his ears, specifically to give them a little bit more depth, to make them look like they're bigger and look like they are fanning away from his body, because elephants have nice big ears like that. They can fan away from their bodies. Now I'm shading his right ear so that it matches his left ear, and also so that it looks like, it's three-dimensional, it's coming away from his body. Now I'm moving on to shading his back leg to make it look like there is some depth to him so that he's not just a two-dimensional drawing, and also to make him look like he's moving forward and walking right towards us. And now I'm adding a little bit more shadow to his leg because I originally didn't add enough depth to it. The reason that I'm making this particular back leg darker than the rest of his legs is because, of course, it's in the shade of the rest of his body, so it will be darker because it doesn't have as much sun on it as the rest of him does. And now I'm making the line around his trunk a lot darker so that I can differentiate the shading on his trunk and the shading on his front leg from each other. And now I'm coloring in his eyes, and of course they are a lot bigger than regular eyes would be on an elephant, but I'm making them bigger specifically so that they're easier for me to see, and personally I think that they're cuter that way. The shading that I'm adding right here is to give his head more depth and to make it look like he has a neck, because you can't really tell because of his tusks and his trunk and his ears, and that's okay. But that way it looks, like his head really is coming forward and that his neck really is there. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a happy Earth Day.